Welcome to The Explainer. So, if you're the kind of person who loves pulling profound little lessons out of completely everyday moments, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're unpacking this really fascinating microstory straight out of a gardener's journal. We're going to examine a happy accident, a moment where nature just kind of intervened, forced a decision, and delivered some incredibly unexpected results. It's honestly a perfect example of how sometimes stepping back and doing the absolute bare minimum can teach us the most about the systems we're working with. We're looking at a first-hand account of unintentional propagation involving the floss flower. Let's jump right in and uncover the mechanics of this happy accident. Okay, let's dive into this. Our source material today literally starts with a simple address. Dear Interweb. It's an entry from Ang titled Notes on Gardening. And you know what instantly grabs my attention? It's part 965. I mean, just think about the level of observation and pure dedication it takes to log nearly 1,000 entries about your garden. This immediately pulls us into this intimate slice-of-life botanical mystery. We aren't reading some stiff academic textbook today. We're stepping directly into the real-time, unfolding reality of someone's backyard laboratory. It's personal, it's immediate, and it sets the perfect stage for the unexpected experiment that's about to happen. Now, every good experiment needs a catalyst, right? And here, we have exactly that. Strong tropical winds. Ang notes that these intense winds just swept through the garden, acting as this totally unpredictable force of nature. This definitely wasn't a planned pruning session. The wind simply knocked down a floss flower, also known by its botanical name, Ageratum. Imagine stepping out into your garden after a massive storm and just finding a bunch of broken cuttings scattered all over the ground. That physical disruption, that's the inciting incident of our story right there. The plant has been forcefully fragmented, leaving Ang with a sudden, completely unplanned mess to deal with. So, faced with these broken pieces, Ang makes some, very specific choices. And this brilliantly illustrates a wonderfully unorthodox approach to the situation. Instead of just throwing the stems away in the compost, Ang decides to propagate them. But think about the actual process here. Or actually, scratch that. Think about what was skipped. Taking the fallen, long stems completely whole, not even bothering to remove the bottom leaves, not cutting them in half to reduce stress, just, boom, planting them straight into a sandy potting mix. If you know anything about typical gardening routines, you can see how surprisingly casual this is. It's a completely low-effort, almost lazy fix that entirely ignores standard careful plant preparation. By all conventional logic, this hasty approach really shouldn't have worked. Yet get this, to my amazement, the cuttings seem to thrive. You can practically hear the genuine shock in Ang's writing. This is essentially the scientific method applied in reverse. An action was taken on a total whim out of sheer convenience, and the observation phase yields a completely surprising outcome. Ang went with a lazy fix, skipped all the careful prep, and the floss flower simply did not care. It survived and flourished anyway. It's just a fantastic reminder that sometimes nature is way more resilient than our carefully curated techniques give it credit for. Now, what's really interesting about this is exactly why this unexpected success actually happened. Because, nothing happens in a vacuum. When you consider the environmental factors, Ang breaks down what created this absolute perfect storm for success. First, we have numerous heavy downpours that specific week. Combine that massive influx of water with the sandy potting mix Ang used, which naturally provides excellent drainage, and you get an ideal, highly aerated yet really moist environment. Even though Ang admits to being kind of unsure if actual roots have fully formed beneath the soil yet, the visual evidence is undeniable. The vibrant leaves are a massive indicator. When you combine that heavy rain balancing out the sandy mix, it creates a super high likelihood of root formation. The weather and the soil essentially did all the hard work that the gardener skipped out on. Let's move to and see how this builds a larger picture of the whole garden ecosystem, because Ang doesn't just stop at this single lucky victory. The journal entry notes that these observations aren't just isolated. They're actually happening across two completely separate microclimates within the garden. This transition takes us from the excitement of a localized, totally unexpected propagation to a much more grounded, realistic, and broader observation. It shows that Ang is testing and evaluating how these little plants behave under slightly varying conditions in the real world, pulling back the lens from that single sandy pot to the garden as a whole. So the crucial point is the central irony of this entire story. On one side, we have the floss flower's inherent demands, right? It requires constant watering and, as Ang observed, it absolutely cannot handle the blazing hot tropical sun. On the other side, we have Ang's reality, a garden situated right under that blazing hot tropical sun. Despite the massive success of the unintentional propagation, the ultimate conclusion is pretty stark.
The plant simply doesn't suit Ang's gardening style. It's a brilliant paradox. The environment perfectly supported the birth of these cuttings through a total fluke of weather and soil, but the overarching climate makes their long-term survival an exhausting chore. The propagation was a complete success, for sure, but the plant's compatibility with the gardener's reality, a total failure.
Which brings us to the final thought Ang leaves us with. A literal cliffhanger straight from the journal. How will these unintentional cuttings progress in the coming weeks? Even despite knowing the plant isn't a good fit, there's just that innate human curiosity to see what happens next. It's a deeply relatable reflection on the sometimes harsh, sometimes hilarious realities of gardening. You can totally succeed at growing something you don't actually want to maintain. So, as you go about your day, I want you to think about this. In your own work or your own hobbies, how often do you experience a process that completely succeeds, only to realize the final product doesn't actually fit your lifestyle? What do you do with your own unintentional floss flowers? Thank you for exploring this fascinating micro story with me, and keep questioning the processes around you.